In the treacherous world of Tudor England where love could bring power or to death, one woman challenged the odds. Her name was Catherine Parr. She was the sixth and last of the wives of the infamous King Henry VIII, a man who tossed aside his wives as though they were pawns on a chessboard. Some had been divorced, 2 had been beheaded, and many wondered, would Catherine Parr be next? But this was no ordinary Queen Catherine. She was smart, savvy, and strong. She played the dangerous game of the Tudor court, juggling love with power and survival with aplomb. How did this noble widow become the queen who didn't just survive Henry, but who made a lasting impact on English history? This is the story of Catherine Parr, the queen who survived a tyrant, fought for the Reformation, and showed that even in the most treacherous of times, a woman could hold power with wisdom and courage. Her path from a life as quiet nobility to the center of Tudor power is one of ambition, desire, and survival. But to grasp her story, we need to travel back to the beginning, too. The world where Catherine Parr's indomitable life began. Catherine Parr was born in 1512 into a world of nobility, duty, and political intrigue. Her father, Sir Thomas Parr, served as a trusted courtier under King Henry VII, and her mother, Maud Green, was a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. Catherine's life had been bound up with the English court from the start. Catherine, growing up in the estates of the Parr family in Westmoreland, enjoyed the best of education. Her mother was a strong woman, a bright woman, who made sure Catherine knew things that were not meant for a woman. She learned Latin, French, and Italian, studied history, philosophy, and theology, and developed a profound love of literature. But above all, Catherine had been taught the importance of diplomacy, grace, and resilience, characteristics that would ultimately save her life. But Catherine's formative years weren't without their struggles. Her father died when she was only 5, and her mother was left to run the family's estates and bring up 3 children alone. Nevertheless, Maud Green's resolve never faltered, and she made sure that Catherine and her siblings would grow up properly for their noble rank. As Catherine matured, her beauty and intelligence turned her into a match in the game of noble marriage. At 17, she married Edward Burrough, the wealthy Lord Burrough's grandson. It was an arranged marriage made by politicians, not lovers, as both grew to power in Tudor England. Living with Edward was brief, as he passed away a few years later, leaving Catherine a young widow at only 21 years old. But Catherine's tale was just beginning. Marrying for a second time, to John Neville, Lord Latimer, a great power among the nobles with deep connections to the court, pulled her still further into the heart of Tudor politics. As Lady Latimer, Catherine experienced firsthand the brutal realities of Henry VIII's reign, including the religious turmoil led by the Pilgrimage of Grace, a rebellion against Henry's break from the Catholic Church. Catherine's coolness under fire made her a person of respect and admiration. Catherine's cool demeanor and quick thinking helped keep her family safe when rebels stormed her home during the uprising. She negotiated with the rebels to keep her household safe, while remaining loyal to the king, a tightrope that foreshadowed the political maneuvering she would eventually display as queen. She had privilege and there was peril during her time as Lady Latimer, but it was during this time that Catherine would come into contact with King Henry VIII. Widowed for the second time in 1543, Catherine moved to court, serving as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife. What she did not realize was that her own fate would soon become inextricably linked to the mighty king. Catherine Parr's story started with strength, intelligence, and resilience. From an early widow trying to navigate all the social complexities of 934 noble life to a woman whose ability to keep her head up in the face of trouble won her a place at court, Catherine's journey had only just begun. She had all prepared her for her toughest role, wife to the most feared king in English history. Court was rife with intrigue in the spring of 1543. King Henry VIII was older and frilier and in poor health, and once again sans queen. His 5th wife, Catherine Howard, had met a gruesome fate, beheaded for adultery. The king's tendency to dispose of wives had become legendary, and many women in his court were terrified of attracting his gaze. But the fates had other designs for Catherine Parr. Recently widowed and working as a lady-in-waiting to Princess Mary, Catherine's beauty, intellect, and charm were hard not to see. One of her admirers was the ambitious and charismatic Thomas Seymour, brother of Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour. Catherine's heart was with Thomas, and their mutual affections were obvious. But then love at the Tudor court was never straightforward. I picked up Catherine Parr because when King Henry VIII had his eye on you, the weight of his attention was both a blessing and a curse. A proposal from the king was not just an invitation to marriage. It was a summons that few could refuse. To refuse Henry's offer may spell political ruin, or worse, death. Catherine faced it in an agonizing dilemma, torn between her love for Thomas Seymour and her loyalty to the king. It was Catherine's sense of duty and her acute political sensibility that made her decision. It was her last chance, and she knew that if she could marry Henry, not only would her mother secure their family status, but she'd have the power to drive change in England's future, particularly in the realms of religion and education. And thus, in July 1543, Catherine Parr married King Henry VIII as his sixth wife. The wedding at Hampton Court Palace was a low-key event compared to Henry's previous marriages. But the marriage opened a new chapter in Catherine's life, one suffused with power and danger and far-reaching influence. Catherine was no callow young bride at age 31. She was a woman weathered by experience, loss, and resilience. Catherine Parr quickly showed that as queen she was much more than a wife. She gained the status of trusted advisor to Henry, giving counsel during his failing health and turbulent reign. She became stepmother to Henry's children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, raising their education and strengthening their bond to the crown. Especially, young Elizabeth connected with Catherine, whose sharp mind and love of knowledge had a profound impact on the future queen. But it came with risks. Being Henry's wife didn't come without its risks, I should say. The king had a notorious temper, and his confidence could be easily shaken. Catherine was aware that one bad move could cost her greatly, but she navigated the gumbo of Tudor court life surprisingly well. She knew the power of words, the value of loyalty, and the necessity of deft diplomacy. But Catherine's ambition reached beyond mere survival. She was particularly interested in the work of Protestants and sought to promote reformist principles in the English court. This passion would soon put her in serious danger, as powerful groups within the court, such as Bishop Stephen Gardiner's faction, regarded her as a peril to the Catholic establishment. The story of Catherine Parr's path to becoming the sixth wife of Henry VIII is one of love, sacrifice, and political savvy. She had entered the most dangerous job in England, but she was resolved to do more than survive. She wanted to thrive. As the new queen, Catherine's influence would quickly expand well beyond the palace walls, influencing the future path of the English Reformation and cementing her legacy. Well, life as the Queen of England was never easy, but for Catherine Parr, it was a steep mountain to climb. The eventual demise of Catherine's sister was also not something that went unnoticed in the treacherous hostel that was the Tudor court, filled with cunning and backstabbing. She was scrutinized, every word noticed, every step watched. Catherine understood that one misstep could lose her everything, her life included. As Henry VIII's sixth wife, Catherine had a particular problem. She had to keep running a king whose health was declining rapidly and whose temper was becoming increasingly unpredictable. Henry had once been a strong and charismatic ruler. Now, he was obese, afflicted with painful ulcers on his legs, and suffering from wild mood swings. But Catherine's patience and compassion never faltered. She nursed the king's ills, comforted him, gained his confidence. But she was so much more than a caretaker. Catherine quickly carved a name as a political heavyweight. In 1544, when Henry departed England to head a military campaign in France, she served as regent, or temporary ruler. While he was gone, diplomatic affairs of the kingdom were efficiently handled by Catherine herself, to the admiration of the court, showcasing her political character. One of Catherine's major contributions as queen was her relationship with Henry's children. She was a major force in the education of Prince Edward, heir to the throne, and Princess Elizabeth, who would one day be her queen and whose keen mind and curiosity reflected Catherine's own. Under Catherine's tutelage, Elizabeth became passionate about learning, marking her future years as queen. Even Princess Mary, who frequently quarreled with her father over religious issues, discovered a sympathetic confidant in Catherine. But Catherine's embrace of the Protestant Reformation put her in a vulnerable place. As a pious advocate of religious reform, she believed that the Bible should be translated into English and that the common people should have access to religious texts. She kept Protestant scholars around her and advanced their works at court. This put her in the crosshairs of conservative factions within the court, notably the powerful Bishop Stephen Gardiner, who was intent on keeping Catholic tradition. The peak of the tension came in 1546 when Gardiner and his allies conspired against Catherine. They charged her with heresy, a crime punishable by death. A warrant for her arrest was issued, and Catherine's fate appeared sealed. But Catherine's brilliant mind and quick thinking saved her. Upon hearing of the plot, she wasted no time getting an audience with Henry. She tried to convince him with her teary eyes that she always stated about the religion just to get his attention and also to draw something from his knowledge, which he always had. Flattered and persuaded, Henry canceled the arrest, declaring, "Poor soul, she is only a woman and therefore may come by pardon." Catherine's brush with death was nothing short of miraculous. She had bested her enemies and won her place next to Henry again. But then the danger was far from over. The Tudor court was a viper's nest, and Catherine knew that the price of survival was constant vigilance. And this is what she did. She fought for education, for religious reform, for the welfare of Henry's children through all of this. Her tenure as queen was both perilous and persistent. She had lived where so many died, and it was proof that intellect and elegance and tenacity could win out, even in the most perilous of days. Catherine Parr was more than just Queen of England. Her influence was felt well beyond the halls of power. Catherine was not simply a passive consort for Henry VIII, she was an active shaper of the nation's religious landscape. Catherine's support of the Protestant Reformation was both bold and dangerous, particularly in an era when being on the wrong side of a religious divide could mean the difference between life and death. Catherine's profound interest in theology and religious reform derived from her broad education. She thought the scriptures were meant for all people, not just for the clergy, and she was in favor of the Bible being translated into English. It placed her in league with Protestant reformers, such as Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Hugh Latimer, both of whom sought to overturn the Catholic Church's dominance. Catherine as queen used her role to promote Protestant ideals. She presided over discussions of religious reform at court, promoted the study of the Bible, and advocated the printing of Protestant writings. One of her great accomplishments was being the first English queen to publish a book in her own name, Prayers or Meditations, in 1545, a collection of devotional writings that expressed her religious beliefs. Catherine's advocacy of reform did, nevertheless, make her a target for conservative elements within the court. The Catholic-leaning Bishop Stephen Gardiner and his allies saw Catherine as a direct threat to their power. They alleged she was peddling heretical ideas and tried to sabotage her at every opportunity. But Catherine was not to be easily intimidated. The most daring moment was when she publicly debated religious matters with Henry VIII himself. She said, Henry, her brains, could appreciate, but her outspokenness made him untrusting. Intuitively understanding that things could escalate, Catherine turned on her admirable wit and charm to diffuse the situation. She convinced Henry that her debates were only so she could learn from him, and that kept her life and her position. Catherine had, herself, a global reach. She was a strong advocate for the education of women, convinced that knowledge was vital for both spiritual development and social engagement. Her groundwork for advancements in women's education in England. Even with the incessant threats, Catherine consistently stood firm in her beliefs. She continued to back Protestant reforms, mentor the young Princess Elizabeth, and advise the future king, Edward VI, who would go on to enact many of the reforms she had advocated. Catherine Parr played a huge role in the English Reformation. She was not only a queen, she was a scholar, a reformer, and a protector of intellectual and religious liberty. Her legacy as a woman at a crossroads of equality and spirituality during a turbulent age serves as a reminder that no matter the odds, a single voice has the power to change the world. Finally, and most significant, when Henry VIII died in 1547, England entered a new era. For Catherine Parr, his death was both an ending and a new beginning. No longer queen consort, she became the Dowager Queen, a title that gave her wealth and influence, but also made her vulnerable in a court that remained awash in political machinations. Once Henry was gone, Catherine was free to pursue her own happiness. Her heart had long been given to Thomas Seymour, the charming and rapacious brother of Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife. Her marriage to Henry, however, had driven a wedge between them. Now, following Henry's death, they had renewed their romance and married in private, only months following the king's death. Their marriage was not without controversy, however. The union was deemed offensive and inflammatory by many, particularly given the proximity to Henry's death. Catherine's rushed marriage to Seymour also infuriated her former stepdaughter, Princess Mary, and gossip rippled through court. But Catherine was not discouraged. She clung to her new love and freedom. As the wife of Thomas Seymour, Catherine's household emerged as a center of intellect and influence. She opened her home to young scholars and thinkers, as well as royal family members. Her most important charge was Princess Elizabeth, Henry's daughter by and Boleyn. Catherine recognized Elizabeth's potential and gave her the education and guidance that would form her future reign. But Catherine's marriage to Thomas Seymour wasn't the fairy tale she had dreamed it would be. Seymour's ambition frequently eclipsed his love. His tireless quest for dominion brought him into dubious activities, such as his sinister interest in the young Elizabeth that brought scandal and affairs which tainted his marriage to Catherine. Against all odds, Catherine's life took what felt like a miracle turn when, in her mid-30s, Catherine found out she was pregnant. This was impressive not only for her age, but because in past marriages she had never given birth. In August 1548, Catherine had a daughter named Mary Seymour. The pleasure of motherhood, though, was brief. Just days post-birth, tragedy hit. Catherine became gravely ill with puerperal fever, a common and often fatal complication of childbirth at the time. Catherine's condition continued to decline despite the efforts of her physicians. She died on September 5, 1548, leaving her infant daughter and a legacy that would live far beyond her years. Her death shattered the hearts of those who knew her, but her legacy survived. Catherine Parr's marriage to Thomas Seymour ultimately ended in heartbreak, but her contributions to the education of Elizabeth and her advancement of the cause of religious reform in NY form her legacies. After Catherine's death, Thomas Seymour's ambitions proved to be his undoing. His plans to control the young king, Edward VI, led to his arrest and execution for treason in 1549. Their daughter, Mary, was put into the care of Catherine Willoughby, the Duchess of Suffolk, but little is known of what became of the girl, as historical records concerning her life cease after early childhood. Catherine Parr's final years really are a testament to her resilience and her desire for love, even amid scandal and sorrow. A woman who dared to believe her heart, even when the world railed against her. Her story is one of strength, mind, and a spirited blaze that burns bright in all of us. The last chapter in the life of Catherine Parr was a bittersweet one, and after years of political scheming, dangerous collusion, and the omnipresent specter of death, Catherine had finally found love with Thomas Seymour. But fate, as so often was the case in the Tudor court, had other ideas. Finally, in August 1548, Catherine's long-anticipated delight came with the birth of her daughter, Mary Seymour. For the first time at 35, she was having a miracle child. Catherine was visibly happy, but the price of bringing forth a child in a time before modern medicine was brutal. Soon after Mary was born, Catherine started showing the symptoms of puerperal fever, an infection that proved fatal for many new mothers. Her health worsened fast. No matter what her physicians did, though, the once bright, strong-minded queen was fading away. Catherine's mind was fraught with pain and delirium in her last days. She was bitter and disappointed with Thomas Seymour, as the overarching story describes, claiming he had neglected and betrayed her. Some historians believe that Catherine suffered great strain during this time, due to Seymour's ambitions and sexual relationships while she was pregnant. It was the morning of September 5, 1548, at Sudeley Castle, and Catherine Parr breathed her last. She was only 36 years old. Her death left in its wake a newborn daughter, a grieving household, and a legacy that would outlast centuries. Catherine was buried in the chapel at Sudeley Castle, and her tomb is there today. Her epitaph, written in Latin, says, "A queen, for piety renowned, for learning renowned, for high estate renowned, lay here in this tomb, Catherine, a wife twice before a widow, who was at length united to the king." Her daughter, Mary Seymour, had been placed in the charge of the Duchess of Suffolk, but the child's fate is unknown. Historical records of Mary disappear after early childhood, leading some to believe she died young, and Catherine's bloodline faded into history. Catherine's death was the conclusion of a life filled with love and loss and power and survival. She had outlived the most perilous king in English history, shaped the future of the English Reformation, and laid the foundations for queens to follow. But even in death, her story was not finished. The subsequent years were marked by the destruction of Thomas Seymour, whose unyielding ambition drove him to a tragically untimely end. Seymour sought power and tried to usurp the direction of young King Edward VI. His plots were exposed, and in 1549 he was arrested, tried for treason, and executed. The man who Catherine had once loved had now become another victim of Tudor politics. Catherine Parr's life may have been over by the age of 36, but her legacy lived on. In addition to being a queen, she was a scholar, a reformer, a survivor. Her contributions to the education of Princess Elizabeth would help form her into the Queen Elizabeth I, whose reign would go down one of the most celebrated in English history. Catherine's involvement in religious reform, her written works, and her behind-the-scenes heroics push her into the realms of one of the most truly remarkable women of the Tudor period. Her story is a testament to the power of intellect, the importance of resilience, and the enduring legacy of a woman who balanced love, power, and survival in a time when all three could mean death. Catherine Parr's time on this earth was no longer than a flash in the pan, but her legacy rings throughout history. Not only was she the sixth wife of Henry VIII, she was a pioneer, a scholar, and a survivor who made a lasting impression on England and her future. The clearest ways in which Catherine influenced Russia were in the area of education and religious reform. Her backing of the Protestant Reformation set the stage for England's eventual split from the Catholic Church. With her advocacy for the translation of the Bible into English for all people, she significantly changed the religious life of the country forever. Her writings, especially prayers or meditations, made her the first English queen to publish in her own right. At a time when women's voices were frequently hushed, Catherine's writings provided advice, encouragement, and insight into the thoughts of a woman who had the audacity to think, question, and express herself. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of Catherine was her influence on the future Queen Elizabeth I. Catherine's intellectual curiosity, politically astute mind, and sustained strength made a lasting impression on the young Elizabeth. Under Catherine's guidance, Elizabeth thrived academically, and she was thus well prepared for a reign that would go on to be marked by brilliance, diplomacy, and steel. Catherine Parr's influence on Elizabeth is often said to have been responsible for the Queen's love of learning, her penchant for religious toleration, and her knack for surviving in the treacherous waters of politics. Catherine's legacy is also in her promotion of women's education. She felt that women ought to have access to knowledge and have the choice to contribute according to their will and ability, not only according to their natural situation. Her views on education were far ahead of her time, and I think gave future generations of women the desire to seek education and influence. Catherine Parr's survival as Henry VIII's wife was no accident, despite the political dangers that surrounded her. With intelligence, tact, and a deep understanding of court politics, she outsmarted her enemies and retained the king's favor. She was a queen who not only survived but flourished in a world built to silence women. Catherine's story is a reminder of the inner strength and the resilience needed to survive in a world that so often tries to make small the very ones who dare to question the status quo. Literature and film and history inflect this legacy, and her story will inspire. Within the vast narrative of Tudor history, Catherine Parr's thread is one of brilliance, perseverance, and gentle revolution. She negotiated love, power, and survival at a time when any one of these things could kill you. Her life is an affidavit of the strength of the human spirit and the power of one woman's influence on the course of history, the statement read. This is the tale of Catherine Parr, a steadfast queen who not only survived, but thrived, leaving a legacy that would shape a nation and inspire generations to come.